with noise. The noise of crowds of people around us who seem less and less inclined to stop and listen and more inclined to shout us down. Nearly every room we enter has electronic devices crying out to us, acting as sirens in both senses, as warning and as temptation. The machines that surround us never shut up, becoming both punchline. Is your refrigerator running? Better go catch it. An ominous threat to our very livelihood, unless we happen to be one of the people who keep the machines proverbially running. Better catch it. The sounds of cars and trucks invade our rest. Even light has noise now, so much noise as to block our ability to see the heavens. All creation is crowded down by pilgrims wandering in an automated world. So much noise. And yet silence has a way of making itself heard then and now. There is a silence when 3 exhausted men accompanied Jesus into the garden. As they gave over to the very human weakness of their bodies and fell asleep, the one they followed also struggled in his humanity, his divine humanity. As he knelt in the garden and sweat dripped like blood from his body, as he struggled with the desire to be anywhere else, and yet knew his purpose was here, the choked and anguished silence that came from holding everything back right before he cried out for God to take this cup from him. It is not unlike the silence that grips our hearts. The silence when we finally turn off the news, fooling ourselves into thinking our exhaustion will overcome our fear, but the worries keep banging around in our heads. We can't quiet them down. We watch videos to figure out how we can flee, how we can be anywhere else, even if we know our home is here. We want to cry out too, to beg God to take this cup from us, but the lump in our throat stops sound from coming out. Let us hear the sound of that silence. There is another silence, the silence of 2 men who are both moving stealthily through the crowd. One has snuck to the authorities with a promise that he can lead them to Jesus. One is following at a distance, safe enough to see his friend, but far enough not to be associated with him. They are trying to be quiet, except when one man promises he knows him, and the other man assures others he does not. Though the silence that they experience is at different times, one just as he approaches the one he will betray, and one as he warms his hands over a fire just before he will deny. With one silence broken by the sound of a kiss and the others by a rooster crowing, it is the same silence, the silence of failure. Like the silence when one we love is caught in a lie. When the betrayal spills out and we find ourselves thinking back on all the moments we thought were one thing but were really another. Moments when our suspicions rose up, but they assured us, gaslit us into believing we were the crazy ones. But the truth came out and the lie was exposed and our world fell apart. There was the noise of begging, of pleading, or of blaming, trying to cover over everything. But our ears were closed up, and the noise of the silence was deafening because we just couldn't hear them anymore. Let us hear the sound of that silence. There is another silence. In the limestone-walled building where a government authority interviewed Jesus, Pilate standing in the cool of his palace with this uncommonly common man before him, wanting Jesus to break the silence with an explanation, one that would get him out of this political nightmare he found himself in. And when Jesus does break the silence, what does he say? I was born and came into this world for this reason, to testify to the truth. Whoever accepts the truth listens to my voice." But Pilate couldn't just listen. He had to ask, "What is truth?" The silence that lingered after that question was all the answer he needed. Pilate's voice still echoes today. What is truth, we wonder, caught in this political nightmare we find ourselves in? We continue to see people suffering all around us in the wealthiest country in the world. People going without food, people kicked to the curb, people imprisoned without fairness, people whipped without rights, people threatened with harm, when all any of us really want is to be able to provide for our family, to keep our loved ones safe, to have food on our table and a roof over our head. We all just want to be loved and to love. That is truth. That is what we shout into the void, and yet it goes unheard. And if it is unheard, was it ever really spoken? Or was it silenced all along? Let us hear the sound of that silence. There is another silence. It comes after the rush of insults and anger, in haste to beat the setting sun and find Sabbath upon us. As nails are pulled and a body falls to the ground, then as two men run carrying it to get to the tomb. There is the noise of panic and fear and loss and anger in all of that moment, and the piercing noise of haste as the stone is rolled, and then the crash of silence. The deafening silence of the tomb. Like the silence that comes just before the machine grinds to lower the casket or the stone moves into place on the columbarium. The silence just after the goodbye that you were told is just for now, but still feels like forever. Just after the gospel is proclaimed, but long before it is fully experienced. There is the deafening silence of loss. Let us hear the sound of that silence. But there is another silence. It takes place in a boisterous meal, where people who have become family are gathered in celebration. And yes, this meal feels different. Heavier in many ways, but hopeful in others. Whatever it will come to be, in this moment, it is home. And there are two silences. One as he lifts the bread, and one as he lifts the cup. Right at that precipice, where bread and cup are just at the moment of becoming body and blood. Right in that breath, where there is silence, there is provision, there is promise, there is love. We know that silence. We know it when all our people are gathered around the table, just before the food is passed, just as everyone has scooted up to the table, just before the prayer is offered. When we all take just a moment to look around, to see all the people, family and friends, who have found their way into our lives, who represent the ones who have passed from our lives, but seeing in those around the table a bit of them, in the way their hair falls across their eyes, or in the wink they shot across the table, or in the crooked smile on their face, just before thanks are given, just before forks are lifted. In that silence is past and present and future. Let us hear the sound of that silence. And there is another silence in that same room as the meal, in the intimacy of a moment. There is the noise of objection. There is the breaking of glass. there is pouring of ointment. But then there is the silence of touch, the silence of healing, the silence of love. As she looked into his eyes and he into hers, in that silence were all the words that were ever needed. We know that silence too. When someone looks into our eyes and we are really seen. When they notice the tear welling up and they take their finger and gently wipe it away as it falls onto our cheek. When, without words, they wrap their arms around us and we know we are loved. We know we are safe. We know we are known. Just before we collapse into grief or joy, into pain or release, just before the wail or the scream or the whimper or the laugh, just in that moment, there is peace. Let us hear the sound of that silence. And then, there is the greatest silence, the sound of one last breath exhaled. That moment, right before the Gospels tell us that the temple curtain was torn in two and the earth shook and the dead rose, right before the earth groaned with a pain never heard before or since, that shattered the silence in cacophonous ways, right before. When that breath was exhaled, the most profound moment of silence ever. All the noise and all the air that makes noise even possible swept into a vacuum of loss. That sharp moment when death appeared to win. But in that moment, the silence of all silence is our greatest hope. And it is where, if we can be still, we hear God's love proclaimed the loudest. Let us hear the sound of that silence. Psalm 46 invites us to imagine the destruction of everything. Holy Week brought that destruction to life. Everything is coming apart. There can be no greater noise than the destruction of all that is. And yet within that noise is the promise of God's restoration. All we have to do is trust. How do we make room for that trust? Be still. Be still. Be still and know that God is God. That is the gift of silence. Amen.